Hello. Okay, so we're going to go through the anatomy of the brain today, and hopefully from some of the other hubs, you already have some sort of idea as to what some of the things that we're talking about. So if we're talking about, for example, the frontal lobe, which I highlighted last time, so about this area, that's the frontal lobe, right? If you guys remember, then we've got the parietal lobe around here, and the occipital lobe back here, and then on the outside of the brain, on the outside surface, that area would be where the temporal lobe is. But this time we're looking at the inside of the brain, and as in the medial surface of the brain. And what instead we can see here is that we have this area known as the thalamus, very important. It's kind of like central station, as we'll talk about later on. This area I'm shading here in orange is going to be the hypothalamus, which is important for a lot of regulation of autonomic function. This is a cerebellum, and I've already written a separate hub on this, so you guys can go and check it out there. And then you've got the brainstem here in purple, and you can already see the subdivisions written in. The midbrains, the pons, and the medulla. They're important in terms of autonomic regulation. So in terms of the neuroanatomy of the brain, I mean, this is quite a complete image as to what you can get out of the brain. And so we're just going to talk about a few of the important things in terms of the neuroanatomy. So, well, like I said, we have cortex. Right. Then we have thalamus, and you think of thalamus like central station. So the thalamus is really the relay point of info, and that's coming from the outside of the body. So all the information from your body is going to come up through the brainstem, do it in red. It will come up through the brainstem to the thalamus, and from thalamus it will go to cortex. That's what's going on there. Okay. Now, what happens with other parts of your brain? So, for example, let's talk about the hypothalamus. So, the hypothalamus is a pretty complicated area. This area here, right? That's the hypothalamus. And it's famously introduced as being responsible for the 4 F's, which is fighting, fleeing, feeding, and sexual reproduction. You can do the rest of the analogy yourself, but that's what it's responsible for. And it actually has widespread connection to the rest of the brain, because it has connections with the rest of the brain that's responsible for altering behavior in such a manner that these sorts of things happen. So the hypothalamus will ultimately be responsible for the 4 F's, and we'll leave it like that. Now the cerebellum, we'll just briefly talk about him, but that's responsible for the smoothness of movement. So some of us are a little bit, well, I won't say unfortunate, but some of us have had experience with excessive amounts of alcohol, and your inability to get your key into the keyhole at the end of the night because your hand's just shaking too much is one of the reasons as to why, because your cerebellum is unable to correct those movements. So that's what happens, and it's usually referred to as an intention tremor. So if we get lesion, we get intention tremor. Okay, how about the brainstem? Well, this area here is the brainstem. Like I said, it's got 3 parts. It's where the cranial nerve nuclei are, and that's very important. And as well, so brainstem, it's got the cranial nerve nuclei, and it's also got a lot of automatic control system over the rest of the body. So things like, sorry, difficult for me to write and talk at the same time, but automatic control over heart and lungs, if you believe that is a pair of lungs. So some good stuff to remember. Okay, this once again, I mean, you should have a rough idea of what's going on, but that's the frontal lobe. This is a parietal lobe. This is the occipital lobe. That's the temporal lobe, and that's the cerebellum down there. You can't see the brainstem. They've taken the brainstem off in that model. But I just want to point out a couple of things in this model that might not seem that obvious, because actually the brain does have a highly regular structure. And you might not believe me, but this area I'm shading in white here is known as the precentral sulcus, right? Because it's responsible for the motor, or it's known as the primary motor cortex, and this is where you have all the origins, if you will, of your movement. Alright, this line going down here that I'm tracing, I'm not sure if you see it on the video too well, but that's known as the central sulcus. Very important to identify, and you'll be able to, with a little bit of practice, identify it on every brain that you come across. This area that I'm now shading in green, once again, I'm not sure if it will come up, you see, so I'm going down here. Maybe I'll shade it a couple of times so you can see what's going on. But that is the postcentral sulcus, and that is responsible for the somatosensory component of your body. So say for example, if you get touched here, you'll feel it, well, the information from your hand will be relayed to this point in your cortex. It sounds pretty crazy. Likewise, the information from your face will be located here, and for your leg it will be located back there. My cat is about to come and disturb me. Okay, so the temporal lobe, this area here is known as the primary auditory cortex. So the superior transverse temporal gyrus of Herschel, I think, is known for that, and that's responsible for auditory information. So we refer to them as A1. The motor area will be M1. The sensory area will be S1. The visual area will be V1 back here, and that's about it in terms of some other things. So yeah. Okay, moving on. Now, maybe I mentioned earlier that there are some deep nuclei in the brain, and it's good to know what they do. So the deep nuclei, and if you remember, they are referred to as the basal ganglia, and they're very important in terms of coordination of movement and that sort of thing. So actually, now I will shade these a bunch of different colors. So this guy here, he's known as the caudate nucleus, and he curls around to the back over there, and actually ends. Well, that's caudate nucleus. Yep. And there are a couple of others around here that aren't actually shown in this model. Well, I apologize. So we will have to cut that bit of the video. So cut the video there. I will talk about the basal ganglia, but I need another image first, and it's probably better to talk about them at another stage. But for the moment here, I just want to demonstrate that. So as outlined, that's the hippocampus there, which is responsible for memory and the formation of new memories. Okay, this thing here is amygdala, and that's responsible for recognition of fear. And it's actually a pretty interesting thing. People who have lesions to this can't actually, they don't feel anything when they see a apprehensive looking face. So for example, they can't tell the difference between a very angry looking face, a normal face, and a very worried face. They can't tell the difference between any of them, and it doesn't evoke any emotional response, which is quite interesting if you think about it. Okay,